Welcome to the Red Letters Podcast. In this podcast, we explore topics that can be life-transforming while delivering a message of hope.
Thank you for joining us on this week's podcast. As you can see, we've been going through this season and hearing the testimonies of each and every person that's part of the podcast. And today we have the honor of hearing Ruth and how she came to God and the difference God has made in her life. So with that, thank you, Ruth, for being willing to share.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe one of the things we could start off with is when was the first time you felt either God or his presence? Not so much that you heard about him, but when you had like a first experience with him at some level. What did that look like, and do you remember?
The earliest memory I have, which I don't know how old I was. I always estimate like 5 or 7. But you guys used to have prayer meetings a lot. Like a lot, Mary. Like they would have them all the time. And we were in our Palomar apartment. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I remember Christmas lights on the edges of the ceiling because we couldn't put lights outside. So we put lights inside.
Yeah, we had an apartment.
Yeah. And we had a prayer night that night. And I don't know, something came over me. I don't know why the Lord let me remember this. But I was little and all of a sudden I just started screaming out like, Lord, I want to be your disciple. Oh. And so I started I don't know how I knew this, but I knew all the names of the disciples. Yeah. So I'm like, I want to be like Matthew. I want to be like Peter. And I'm like going through the list. But it was like this deep wail as a little girl. I'm little. Mm-hmm. And I see kids now at like 5, 6, 7. I'm like, I was that old when I was praying like that, you know? But that's the earliest memory I have of feeling something other than, reality.
Mm-hmm. And when would you say you entered into a relationship with him where you didn't just experience him, but you actually kind of surrendered to him?
So as most people know, I was raised in church, but I want to say it wasn't until my early 20s that I feel like that was when the Lord really marked me. Gio shared in his testimony how the Lord came into our home one time. But even after that, I was still kind of like, okay, Lord, like, I know you used my brother. And how Gio explained it so perfectly, he was like, I was kind of like a holy jealousy came over me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, dang, it was so easy for Anthony to meet with you. Like, he went to his closet and 20 minutes later he comes out and he's like, get the oil. And so it wasn't until a couple years after that, no one was going in church. It was just me. And I was like jumping around churches because I was like, I want to find one. And I told myself, at the time I had a lot of responsibility on myself. I was like, Lord, if I give up, then I don't know if my family's going to like find you, like stick with you, because everyone was doing their own thing. So I was juggling around churches. I wrote down a list. I went to like a dozen churches in 2 years. And I was going for like, some of them I went for like 2 weeks. Some I went for a few months. Yeah. But I would just go all the time. And one church, it was called Upper Room, not too far from here. Mm-hmm. And it was like a little small hole. They were renting a room from a bigger church. And by the time we went to visit this church, I was spending hours with God. Like every day after work, I would come home. At 9:00 was my time. So if my mom tried to talk to me, I was like, no, it's 9:00. You can't mess with me. This is God's time. And so I was like full. Like I was full. But I still hadn't like figured out like where God was leading me. I didn't really feel that seal yet. Like, okay, I'm yours and you're mine. I was just like hungry. And so we go to this church and they invite us to a Bible study. So we go to the Bible study, my mom and I. And we're sitting down and we're having, they're having a Bible study, whatever. And when they're about to finish the study, and I feel like I'm known for this now, where I just like to interrupt things when it's like supposed to be over. And so they were closing out in prayer. And I don't know these people at all. And all of a sudden my tongue just starts to like do this weird like blah, 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 blah. And I feel this like my whole body has like chills, but I'm not cold. I just like I don't even know how to explain it. And all of it. And then I said, I'm so sorry for interrupting. I know you guys want to like enjoy your food, but I think, no, I didn't say, I think I just said like, the Lord has something to say. And so I shared what the Lord gave me, and the whole room was silent, like, like a pin drop. But I knew it was God, because I have this, like, when I'm nervous, I'll like stutter or whatever. I mess up my words. Like I can't speak clearly sometimes when I'm really nervous, especially in a room with people I don't know. But it was so clear, and there was so much authority, and I felt fire coming out of me. Like it was so like, and after I was done, I was like, okay, well, I'm ready to go. So I'm like, I look at Mom and I'm like, Mom, let's get out of here, because the whole room was quiet. Like they didn't know what to do, but I knew it was conviction. I knew the Lord was in the room, but I knew I was done. Like I was like, okay, well, they don't need me. I was like, they need you. So we left, and on my way home, that's when the Lord reminded me of the letters he sent to churches. And he sent each letter specifically for the needs of that church. And in the moment when we're driving home, I just start to like feel this pain in my chest. And the Lord, I don't know. And again, no one's ever talked about this, so I don't know, like, it's just between me and the Lord. But I believe the Lord told me in that moment, he's like, you're called to be a letter. Not necessarily like go to all these churches, whatever, but it was just like, I gave you a word. And when I send you somewhere to speak, you're meant to speak. And so, and that car ride is when I felt the Lord mark me. I don't know if you've heard, I think you've heard that story, Dad, right?
I think so. I don't think every detail.
But
That's beautiful.
that was the marking moment, because I had never felt that before.
So I have a question, Ruthie. It's you said you grew up in the church, so you were basically born and you guys already knew everything about church.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there ever a time while you were a small child that you questioned it? Like, what are we doing? What is this?
I did, because I saw how we were outside of church. So I heard who God was. My parents instilled biblical principles. I knew the scriptures. But then when we would come home, we were different people. So it made me question, okay, is this real? Like, are we really supposed to like act this way and this way? Like, if this is how it's supposed to be, then you must not be real.
Something wasn't connecting for you.
Right.
Even as a child, you knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And there's a reason I ask you this, because people who didn't grow up in the church don't understand why you go to church. Like, so as a kid, you look at other kids, and I think that would be different. Like, you go to school, I forget, you were homeschooled.
For most of my life, yeah, I was homeschooled.
Oh, okay. But when you interacted with other kids, was it typically just kids from the church, or kids out also just?
Well, I went to middle school for a few years, and that was a whole culture shock. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. And did anybody ever say why? Because I'm guessing that at school you talked about God, or, not all the time, but I'm sure people
I was
knew.
a rebel.
Oh,
so
okay.
I was like, I went like I felt like I was going into a new world.
Oh, okay.
Because I was very like sheltered. So I was only allowed to listen to Christian music, Christian movies, no radio. I didn't know anything. So when I went to middle school, people saw me as like
a foreigner.
a foreigner. Yeah. Like they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
They're just like, have you heard of this? Have you heard of this? Have you heard of this?
Oh,
and I'm like, no, I saw JG to the Jet Plane and VeggieTales, and, so.
Yeah. But you didn't feel out of place?
I did, but I was kind of like, I knew who I was at that point because I was already like in my teenage years. So by that time I was already like, my brain was like shaped a certain way.
Okay.
So.
Oh, nice. I love that.
And in this part, I want to bring it up, but I don't know. I think you remember it only because of how many times it's been repeated. But I remember, how old was she, Ida, in that prayer?
5.
Yeah, probably about 5, where we were at a church and we were meeting in one of our friends' apartments, and the pastor was there. How many people was there? Probably 20 people.
20-something people.
Yeah. And we were all praying, people on the stairs praying, all spread out throughout the apartment. But then, like, all of a sudden, you were seeking God. And of course, I don't think you did it intentionally, but it's almost like your spirit just kind of like met up with God's spirit. And it was just like an amazing thing hearing you turning around and praying in a point where there was like a wailing, almost like an agonizing. And I remember everybody in the room, including the pastor, everyone just like, almost like what you just mentioned, a pin couldn't drop. And you were just wailing and praying to God. And it was like so innocent, but like so powerful at another level that very few times I ever experienced that. And you just prayed so much. And then after that, just everybody was quiet for a while. It's almost like we didn't know how to respond, because I think a lot of us never really saw that. We've heard about it, that it happened over there back in this day, or, 100 years ago at this other church. But being in the room and experience it, there was almost like a thickness or a heaviness that came into the room. And I, being your dad, I feel that that's probably one of the main times that God marked you, but you were unaware of it. You know what I mean? But, do you remember that at all, or not really?
No, not at all. But I mean, I'm sure I know as a kid, God marked me because of the stories I heard, and the little memories I remember of like, what's the term? Almost like outreaching on the streets. I remember those as kids, you guys going out in the streets. And then me also having this weird courage to like tell a stranger about the Lord. But I was very intense too. So I'm like, you're smoking a cigarette, you're going to hell,
Yeah.
But I knew I was different, very young, which is what made it easier for me when I met new people, because I just thought like, well, you're your way, but I know who I am. So I didn't question it. So I know I met the Lord in my older years, but I knew it was because of what God did with me at a young age that kept me where I was to actually have those encounters as I grew up.
And how would you explain the time from when you experienced him to when you surrendered to him? How would you explain that time? Was it like something that was kind of maybe in the back burner, or you were just accumulating knowledge of him but not experiencing him? Or what did that look like? Because seeing you live during that point, there's times where it seemed like you were super close to him.
Yeah.
But when you say that you surrendered in your 20s, that's, I guess, sort of new to me, if you will, because there's times in between where I saw that it appeared different.
Well, no, I know I had a lot of moments with God up until that point. Like I had a lot, but I always saw myself going quickly back to like other things. Even in the church I grew up in, like I call it my like high school experience at church. I grew up in this church, and I would go to services. I would serve in the kids ministry. I was a part of their worship team for a while, but then I would just go to church and it would just be a hangout with friends, and we would just mess around. And it wasn't this holy reverence. It was just like, I was just being a teenager, but then I would have a lot of experiences where God met with me, but it was only for a moment.
If you could talk to young women today, if there's young women out there, young, and what I mean by young is like, as long as they can hear, they can turn on the radio, they can hear this. What would you tell them? What would be your encouragement to them, especially for those who don't have parents in the home talking about God?
If their family's not saved, but they're searching?
If their family's not, so for example, there's this kid, they don't know anything about God. No one in the home talks about God, but they happen to go into, I don't know, a grocery store, and this station is playing.
Oh, okay.
And you can talk to that girl. What would you say? Because remember, God's foreign to them. They don't know this. What do you mean? Who's this God? So they're going to hear for the first time, oh, she's talking about God and she's young. What does she mean by that? Who is this God?
Honestly, I don't know if I would say anything really crazy, but I would just tell them that the Lord loves them. I think that's the easiest thing to say, but it's also the most, like, if they could grasp that, then everything else would fall into place, for them to believe that Jesus loves them.
Okay.
But I wouldn't really know. It would have to be Holy Spirit. Like, what do you want me to say to this person?
What do I say at this time? Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that question made sense to you guys.
Yeah.
But, okay.
I would probably just add, knowing you, that it would probably be that exact thing. You would probably start like that, and once you open your mouth, God's going to tell you the next thing to say.
Yeah.
That's why it's, I think, a little hard to plan it, if you will.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing, separate from what you've already shared, either a couple or another intimate moment you had with God that you know you met with him? And why I'm asking that question is because some people desire to experience him at a whole nother level besides just the typical reading and praying, but they want to have a moment with God, and they're so hungry for that. But if it happens, I'm sure they'll know what it is. But I think sharing some of that maybe could help them not be pointed in the right direction, but at least maybe even become hungrier to see that happen. You know what I mean?
A lot of the moments that I can recall at the top of my head right now were moments that typically would happen sometimes at church, not bigger times, but like some would happen at church, but the more deeper moments happened when I was by myself in my room or in the living room we're in right now. And it's funny because yesterday at the prayer vigil we had at church, like halfway through, I was just kind of sitting there quietly and I'm like, okay, Lord, like, I'm reading, I'm giving you my attention, like, what do you want to tell me? And Alexis, he was playing the piano and he started playing He Loves Us. I love that song so much. I wish we did that song more. But when he played that song, I was reminded of maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. I was in this living room, and I didn't know why, but the Lord woke me up, and he's like, go play me a song. And I'm like, well, what song do you want to hear? And no answer. So I'm like, okay, so I just get up and I go to my piano, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna sit here until, until the right song comes to mind. And so I'm just playing, and then all of a sudden I just heard this like really loud voice, just like, I love to love you. And it sounds so silly, right? Because we hear it all the time, but it's different when he tells you, because my parents told me all the time growing up, they're like, Jesus loves you. You go to church, Jesus loves you. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. But when I'm sitting there and I'm playing the piano, all of a sudden, as soon as I hear it, I like repeat it really fast. I'm like, you love to love me. And I think I played for like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And I just said the same thing over and over. But as I did it, I felt like he was literally with me. It wasn't this like far off person. It was like, no, he was sitting with me, like singing it to me while I was singing it to him. But as I was hearing Alexis yesterday, the Lord reminded me of that moment I had with him. And I literally started trembling. As soon as he reminded me, I like started shaking and I just couldn't control myself. I just kind of wailed in my little corner. But the Lord just reminded me in that moment of that memory, but also to tell me like, it's so simple. Like, I just let me love you, because when you let me love you, everything else will make sense. And so, yeah, I feel like that's the one that came to mind when you asked me that right now.
Would you mind like expanding a little more on what that statement means, where God himself is saying, I love to love you? Because we hear Jesus loves you, like you said.
Yeah.
But when you say he loves to love you, what does that mean to you? A little, if you could share a little bit more on that.
Well, I mean, for me, I grew up with a lot of insecurities. I knew I was a daughter of God. I knew all the right things. But I questioned a lot. I was like, I'm not like this person though. And I would talk to God about, I'm like, I'm not like this. Like, I don't look like this. I don't sound like that. That person talks so much better than I would just start to compare myself. And people think just because I grew up in church, I was like a perfect angel. And even in middle school, they're like, you don't do anything bad, huh? And all my cousins would make fun of me and they would try and push me to do things. And I'm just like, no, I'm okay. Like, I don't need that stuff. Yeah. But it's like, even when I did mess up, when he's singing that over me, it's like he's reassuring me, like, even in those moments, not only do I love you, but I love to love you. Just like that verse that says, like, you delight in showing mercy. It's like he loves to love us, to lavish us with his love. And so, yeah, I feel like when he says he loves to love me, he loves to love me when it doesn't make sense. He loves to love me when I do all the wrong things. He lavishes it on me, and it's just because he loves to do it. I don't even know why. A lot of times I'm like, why? Like I'm like, why? Like, why? And he just responds, I love to love you.
Oh. So, Ruthie, I was going to ask, we're going back to that. What does it feel like? Because once again, you're young, and that's why I'm asking you. What does it feel like to have an encounter with God? Because it's different for everybody. But if somebody said, I've never had an encounter with God, or I don't know what that means, or he doesn't come and talk to me, what does that feel like? If you could explain it.
I think the best ones I can't explain. And that's the beauty of it. I think it's just, you just have to pray that they would have their own encounter.
Right.
But little ones, I would say, like, my growing up, sometimes my ears would kind of burn. Or if I knew the Lord was meeting with me, my heart would beat really fast.
Okay.
Almost like I'm like in front of thousands of people, like that nervous feeling you would get. That's what I feel. And I don't understand why I feel that way, but it's almost like I know something bigger is around me.
Okay.
And so I usually, my body will respond, which I think it's funny because in the Bible, you see a lot of instances where the Lord meets with someone and their response is to fall down.
Yeah.
And so in that same way, I think when the Lord encounters us, a true encounter, your body can't help but manifest itself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's super crazy and like your whole body's twitching for a consistent amount of time. But other times it could just be your hands shake. Or I met a woman and she was sharing about the Lord, and I knew the Lord was there, and her hands would be full of oil. And at first I was like, you're just sweating. But I went and I touched her, and I was like, this is literally her oil just started coming from her hands.
Oh, nice. Wow.
But for me, my body reacts, and I just know something bigger than myself is present.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When was it that you, I'm sure it was after you dedicated yourself to God and decided to follow him and start your journey with him, but when was it you became comfortable in your own skin to be who he called you to be? You know what I mean? Where you like, hey, I'm going to do what God asked me to do. And sorry if this seems out of the ordinary or offensive, but I need to be, I would rather be obedient to him than to please you.
I feel like I've always had a somewhat boldness since I was a kid. Just because of the pictures that I remember and the stories that I would hear, I was like, dang, I was a really gnarly child. But even, like I said earlier, like I would have my moments of insecurity. I had this when the Lord was on, like when I knew the Lord was with me, there was a holy boldness that I don't care what I look like, what I said, I was like, I know you're with me. And there's this peace that comes over you in the boldness that you can't describe. But I feel like when I had that moment in that Bible study, that was just a reminder of the boldness I had as a kid. Because I had moments of boldness when I was in my teenage years, I remember. But when I had that marking after that Bible study, from that moment forth, I noticed I had a lot more moments of boldness, like more consistent. And then also too, my parents would always every time a moment would happen and I would speak out or the Lord would say something, whatever it was, my parents would always come up to me and they would just reassure me. Not reassure me like that was God, because I didn't need that. But they were like, we're with you. So if you'd said something and people, responded a certain ways, like, I want you to know, like, I will always have your back.
Oh, awesome.
So having people around you like that is priceless.
Yeah.
That helps.
Is there a longing that you're hoping for or maybe anticipating with you and God?
There's always a longing, even if I forget it for a moment. Yesterday, the verse that kept coming to mind was, I think, in Psalm 63, but it was talking about, I'm lovesick for you. It was David. And every time I get a taste, I feel like it deepens the longing in me to want it more. And not just every so often, but consistently, where you wake up, he's with you. You get in your car, he's with you. You get to your job, he's with you. You encounter customers, he's with you. But it's not just that, he's with you, but it's like he knows that he can use you. Mm-hmm. So I feel like every day it's getting deeper and deeper. I'm not there yet, but every day it gets deeper and deeper.
Ruthie, what is God's purpose for your life? Do you know?
That's
what do
funny.
you believe?
Everyone,
Thank you for asking that.
Everyone, it's funny because we just went through like a vision purpose month at church. And everyone's like, what's the purpose God has for you? And I'm always reminded of this, and I believe it's the Lord reminding me. I'm called to him. Mm-hmm. That's my purpose. Whatever it looks like, I don't always know. I kind of go as the days move. Mm-hmm. But my goal in life, the reason I'm alive is for him. Mm-hmm. So whatever that looks like, if it looks like speaking to people in a church, so be it. If it looks like going to homeless, that's what it looks like. But he draws us to himself. Our calling is first to him. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, Lord, maybe you have a business in me, whatever. But no, sir. It's always been since I was young. Even when I tried to do other things, he was always like, you're mine. Mm-hmm. And so anytime people are like, what's your purpose? My purpose is to live with Jesus, to love Jesus, be loved by Jesus, and whatever that looks like beyond that point is up to God.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Ruthie, thank you so much for your transparency and for your trust. This was an amazing testimony, and I hope that when young women out there hear you, they know that there's also a purpose in them, and that's to love God and be loved by God. Thank you.